I'm interested in my research in the relationship between educational expansion and inequalities within society. And we've seen really over the course of the 20th century staggering expansion in education across the world and within the UK. So we're sitting here recording this in a university which didn't exist before the 1960s, and that's true of many universities across the country. Yet now we have a situation where almost 1 in 2 young people go to university. So really staggering expansion. If we go back earlier than that, we see even more radical expansion within education. Across the early 20th century, we've seen the expansion of schooling. My great-grandmother was illiterate, didn't go to school. My grandmother didn't go to secondary school, and my parents were part of the first generation to benefit from the 1944 Education Act, which saw the introduction of free secondary schooling for all pupils in England and Wales. And they would have been amongst the first people to sit the 11 plus examination, which selected them into one of 3 different sorts of schools: the grammar school, the secondary modern school, and the secondary technical school. And this tripartite system of 3 sorts of schools really dominated schooling through to the 1960s. And it very much meant that the sort of school you attended affected your life chances afterwards. So we'd seen expansion of schooling. Did it mean a reduction of inequalities within society? Well, to some extent, researchers found no, because if you got into grammar school, you were well set and you would tend to have good outcomes at the end of that. But getting into grammar school was really difficult because it was very difficult to pass the 11 plus, and often it was children from well-educated and privileged backgrounds that passed the 11 plus at a much higher rate. In the 1960s, we saw the process of comprehensivization begin, whereby that system ended and comprehensive schools replaced the old sorts of schools. And at the same time, we saw the expansion of higher education. So universities similarly went from a situation where it was very rare, even for very privileged children, to go to university, to something which is much more common. So we've moved really from an elite system to a mass system, and some would argue we're approaching a universal system of higher education. And I think what we see at that kind of tipping point in the 1960s is we see a shift from this selection at 11, which was happening with the schooling system, to a selection at 18, whereby getting into university and then later getting into certain sorts of university would make all of the difference. And really, as we see the kind of finish of comprehensivization, we start to see the takeoff in higher education growth in the 1990s. So the 2 things are very closely tied together, almost as if inequality is finding a way of reinventing itself. And what we now see, and what my research shows, is that we see really clear differences between different kinds of universities. So the oldest universities, if we think of the ancient universities and some of the universities established in the 19th century, their graduates tend to have much better outcomes in terms of salaries, occupations, even health, than graduates of the newest universities and newer universities. And we see the universities also organising themselves into different groups that reflect these different statuses and really enhance and solidify those different statuses. And that's seen in things like league tables for universities, which we really see appear in the 1990s too. So what we've seen is certainly expansion of educational opportunity, but whether we've seen inequalities dissipate and disappear on the back of that, or simply be reinvented and passed up to the next level, is what my research concentrates on.